Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to another Acuity webinar. My name is Steve Smedley. This is our final webinar, seventh webinar, I think that is, in our spring series that aims to pick up various white paper themes and other hot topics. In this case, it's the environmental agenda, particularly carbon neutral. I'd also like to welcome Alex Gibson from the CIH and Jonathan Higgs from Raven. And yeah, today's topic is achieving net zero targets. I was just saying to the guys just before that, you know, when we raised this topic, perhaps, I don't know, 6 months to a year ago, I think people, only a minority of people at the clubs were actually starting to think about this. But certainly over the last few months, I know this is on everybody's agenda and it's increasingly a hot topic, not least of which is how you balance achieving net zero targets with all the other demands on your cash, which I know is something that the regulators, particularly keen to understand from a VFM perspective, is how you're going to divvy up your finite budget between achieving net zero and achieving improvements and achieving the required health and safety requirements you need, whilst also obviously aspiring to develop answers on a postcard. So this is a challenge for all. It seems that everybody's pretty much at the start of their journey at the moment. So it's great to have Raven here because I think they might be a little bit further ahead on their journey. We're going to take a closer look at policy in this area, and so Alex is going to walk us through that. But we'll also see how Raven's cracking it. So before I hand over to the guys there, I'll just remind you this webinar is scheduled to last for an hour. If you've got a tech issue during the session with your sound and vision, just use the chat function at the bottom of the screen there to get in touch with James. James, if you could give people a wave. James will sort out all of your tech issues for you. He's onto it. The guys will be taking questions right at the end. If you've got questions for them, could you please use the Q&A tool also at the bottom of the screen and post nice, neat, succinct and to the point questions. I'll be sifting through them and putting them to the guys verbally. A recording of this will be available shortly after we've finished, as will respective presentations. So you'll have that for posterity, but also do direct your colleagues to this if they couldn't make it today. That is more than enough from me. Over to you two. I think you're up first, Alex.
Yeah, that's right. If you could just share my slides, Steve, that would be fab, thanks. Get going. I think you may have to click from beginning, Steve, on the far left. Not sure where it's gone.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
It's just completely in the rehearsal, guys. This worked perfectly. Normal service.
Now, aren't we? After a year and a half of remote working, it never gets any easier.
I wouldn't mind. Do you know what? I must have done this 100 times.
Have you clicked share screen?
I have. It's not. It's playing up.
Don't worry. I mean, while you're having a look, Stephen, while you're having a
Yeah,
go.
if you can crack on, if you can see
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
no, that's fine. Yeah. So hi everyone. Like Steve just said, I'm Alexandra Gibson. I'm a policy and practice officer at the Chartered Institute of Housing. Obviously it goes without saying, I hope you're all safe and I hope you're all well. And thanks for coming along today. So yeah, I mean, the debate about climate change, I think, has reached a significant turning point now with the COVID-19 recovery driving it even more. So from CIH's perspective, I think you know, we shouldn't any longer be talking about whether we have a problem. We know we've got one, but it's the question now is concerned more about what we need to do to reduce emissions significantly, how many we've already reduced, but also how we can actually do it with the resources that we have available today, with not as much reliance on government as we have had. So that kind of does look different and varies from provider to provider and the services that they offer. So my presentation is really just to provide a bit of a national context in regards to what commitments we at CIH would like to see from government, some of the costs involved and the barriers that we're having to overcome. But I do want to touch on the new Decent Homes Review as well. That's currently being consulted on as an outcome of the Social Housing White Paper and essentially how that ties in with energy efficiency. I do think it's important to say that by taking action now and implementing decarbonisation measures to whichever level you're capable of doing with the resources you have, you'll be playing a key part in any economic stimulus after the COVID-19 pandemic as well, and that's really what we're trying to do, to generate a huge programme to improve energy efficiency of the housing stock. So this in itself has the potential to generate thousands of jobs across the UK, but especially within the housing sector as well. Do we have the... Yes, well, that's fine. If you just leave it on that slide for now, Steve, that's fab. I think as well, what I'd mostly like for to take away today, especially after we hear from Jonathan from Raven Housing about their net zero journey, is that it's important to focus on what we can be doing now as providers without relying heavily on government direction and money, because we could be waiting a while, although, you know, I do hope that's not the case anyway. Yes, so just a quick bit of background on CIH. So we've recently launched a new professional standards to equate with the common goal that by applying recognised and valued characteristics and standards in your day-to-day role, the whole housing profession gains a higher degree of trust and credibility. And I believe this is important, especially with the net zero agenda, because you're going to be trusted to make big changes to the homes that people live in. So by all means, check them out on the CIH website after this if you like. But from this net zero perspective in CIH, I think it's important for us to understand, and today, you know, it'd be good to have a discussion at the end of the presentation with the audience, what it is that providers need or would like to have in the way of support from CIH, from their professional body, and also what your goals look like at this particular time. Could I have the next slide, please, Steve? Yeah. So the UK is legally obliged to reach net zero carbon by 2050. We all know that number now, and that was passed in legislation in 2019. So the current condition of housing stock is basically unfit for the future at this present moment. So the 29 million homes that we have must be made low carbon and low energy, and it's a UK infrastructure priority now. So around 20% of homes currently overheat, even in cool summers, even when it's cold. So housing can lead the drive here because as a sector it's unique. We've got insight into customer and community needs, and we're very well placed to drive carbon reductions across whole areas. But I think it's important as well to mention that because of our unique positioning, we can also address inequalities and deliver better outcomes in public health and, you know, help economies thrive post-pandemic with this agenda. So landlords really should now be factoring the cost of decarbonisation of stock into their long-term business plans if they haven't already done so. I don't think it's now a case of, you know, people are just setting out. I think if you haven't started to do that, then now is really the time to do it, as you will lag behind. So our UK Housing Review that we do yearly highlights the widespread call for a green recovery plan as a result of the pandemic, and retrofit's going to play the biggest part in that. So there's a strong consensus at the minute that a retrofit programme both contributes to meeting the government's carbon targets and creating jobs, but as I mentioned at the start, the problem is that so far various initiatives from government, such as the Green Homes Grant, has fallen well short of the effort required. Next slide, please. So this is just for you to have a little look at yourself just for a minute. So in an ideal world, this is what, as landlords, we should be striving for. This is taken from the Committee for Climate Change's report, Unfit for the Future, the UK housing stock. So these are things to be considering a top level strategy when factoring into your business plans, how you're going to pilot these various elements of energy efficiency and ensure they're working, that sort of thing. So monitoring is key. If you're going to be doing these things, consistently monitor, make sure it's doing what it says on the tin. Next slide, please, Steve. So yes, back to the 2019 legislation, government changed the law to aim for net zero economy altogether by 2050. And in the housing sector, achieving net zero carbon essentially means building new homes that are net zero and, if possible, actually generate energy, for example, for electric vehicles, retrofitting existing homes to a huge scale to raise their energy efficiency, and make their power and heating sources renewable. But also there's a focus on decarbonising the rest of a social landlord's operations. So that would include anything from moving away from petrol-based vehicle fleets and making offices net zero carbon. Now that's something interesting in itself now, because I think post-pandemic, I'm not entirely sure what the office world is going to look like anymore. And I think strategies will have to be taken over there to actually help people work from home effectively and to fit in with the net zero strategies as an organisation as well. But it's also things like reducing consumption of non-renewable materials, water consumption, and so on. So social landlords, we believe at CIH should be taking the lead on this agenda to benefit tenants and staff and to create jobs, as I keep mentioning, because that is the main thing here. But landlords should be ready to take any advantage of stimulus packages and ensure that they can have a wider role in driving decarbonisation through their own innovative methods as well. Next slide, please, Steve. So at the minute, just having a look at EPC standards, 19 million UK homes fall below this standard, meaning that 1.2 million homes must be retrofitted each year to achieve that. In 2018, Scotland published a route map to meeting the EPC Band C target by 2040, which is actually now being advanced to 2030, which we would like to see happen in England. There was a consultation recently on the private rented sector and whether or not we would be able to reach EPC Band C across the whole private rented by 2035. But I think people thought that was a little bit optimistic, and I think it's now being kept to 2040. The Welsh Government has been recommended to set a target of achieving EPC Band A in social housing within 10 years. Again, whether we think that's achievable, it would be amazing if it was. But so far, there's no specific target for Northern Ireland, but this gives you some sort of idea of what's going on in the developed nations for things like EPC and cutting emissions as well. Next slide, please, Steve. So when it comes to setting targets or just generally understanding the scale of the work needed for an organisation, you know, I can understand why it feels like a minefield to many. Some of the main problems I think we'll have are, of course, the high costs, the financial implications. So based on the average decarbonisation cost per property provided to an Insight Housing collection of 207 case studies, I believe it was, the outcome was that it would cost roughly around about 104 billion. And that was used as an indicator for just the social housing sector alone. And I believe they calculated that by multiplying by 5 million the average per property figure provided by the landlords in those case studies. So the UK government did come out and say that the cost of decarbonising our housing stock could be anywhere between 35 to 65 billion. But if you take into account Insight Housing's case studies there, that is seriously underestimating the cost of upgrading energy efficiency of homes in the UK. So it goes without saying that the requirements for increased building safety, especially now, and meeting net zero targets will require a significant funding boost. And CIH did recently release a joint report with Orbit called Warm Homes in a Safe Environment, which also highlighted the average cost of around about £17,000 to £20,000 per property to meet EPC Band C target in England, if combined with other refurbishment work. So yes, essentially we would like to see a huge injection of funding from government, but at the moment that's not there. But what is there? So in the Conservative election manifesto, I think it was 9.2 billion was promised over 5 years for energy efficiency work beginning this year and last year. So the Green Homes Grant, which I mentioned earlier, which doesn't exist anymore, was described by the Prime Minister as a significant plank in his 10-point plan for green recovery. And it did have the potential to vastly upscale energy efficiency improvements. And we think it's a total shame that it's had to disappear almost as quickly as it was announced. The feedback was that generally there was a series of administrative mishaps, saying only about 6% or 6.5% of that 1.5 billion spent. I think it was all to do with homeowners struggled to get approvals for vouchers needed for payments, and builders were put off by the burden of red tape, was the feedback. So the Environmental Audit Select Committee have agreed the scheme needs to be overhauled, and we've been responding to that at CIH as well about what we think that should look like. So it would be good to see it done as soon as possible, because, as I said, some of the unspent money being rolled over, isn't being rolled over. So the potential it does have, although the government remains relatively quiet on the failure of the scheme, we'd like to see an overhaul, as with any policy and programme, designed for the desired outcomes. And in this case, we need to see robust guidance for eligible households, and we need to see specific actions to effectively roll out the scheme and proper arrangements for implementation, but also some clear and concise guidance for landlords as to how they can access and secure that kind of funding. So while we do hope for an overhaul of the Green Homes Grant, what we do have in the meantime in England is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which supports the energy efficiency measures of social housing. And again, that started up last year and is running over this year. And that in itself aims to boost green jobs as part of the COVID-19 recovery plan as well. It's a £50 million programme to support social landlords in demonstrating innovative approaches to retrofitting their own stock at scale. And the way we see it is that it is an opportunity to explore the most appropriate measures to your own organisation to lower each of your property's carbon footprints. And I think its main objectives is to encourage innovation and, sort of trial and error and see what works for yourself. At Stratford District Council, they've secured 1.45 million of this funding from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund demonstrator. Easy for me to say. And they've outlined some of their plans, which include external wall insulation, floor insulation, and air source heat pumps. So they're expecting to run that up until December, and they're going to be releasing a research report highlighting, what they've learned of best practice from the rollout. So it'll be interesting to see what lessons can be learned from that. So other stuff sort of top level with government and what CIH have been asking for, and not just us, other bodies as well, like the NatFed. We've urged government to make a full commitment, and we did ask for that in their own statement, but there wasn't anything of significance there. We believe it should be showing consistency of effort across the whole of the UK to ensure a fair and equitable approach to meeting a UK-wide target. But the most important thing for us, I think, is that the government now really need to give a clear role to social landlords to really grasp this and take the lead. And they do need to help with providing extra resources that enable them to do so. But making public money available isn't enough in itself, and ways must be found to lever in private finance as well, stimulate the market and drive action from the banks where possible. So a skilled workforce is going to be needed, new materials and technologies are going to be required, and measures are going to be had to put in place to ensure work's carried out to a high standard to protect the investment that you do make as well. So yeah, in public awareness of the importance of energy efficiency is becoming more. It's good to see people are making a conscious effort now in building this into their work plans. But yeah, it goes without saying that people back in the programme and investing in their own homes is the most important part here. So what I will also say as well about the skills is that I think with the pandemic and with everything that we're doing now to retrofit and to build new homes at net zero, and there's going to be opportunities opening up around the country as work accelerates. And again, I think it's important to remember that the skills that we're going to need is going to be diverse, from scientists to engineers to communications professionals, communicating with tenants on this as well, and data specialists. So I think as viable technologies emerge, we're going to need the right people with the right skills develop, and this is something that's hanging in the balance a bit as well as we try to navigate how best to deliver on the agenda, and of course the chopping and changing government policy and funding. But it would be good to see further support and training of new people and the upskilling of current workforces. I believe getting your data right from the get-go is one of the most important aspects of doing things properly. And Jonathan, I believe, is going to be talking about how Raven have managed the data from the start and why this is especially important. Next slide, please, Steve. Yeah, so as I said, there's no shortage of suggestions for driving decarbonisation forward, and we know that we're going to need a baseline government strategy as a bare minimum for at least the next decade to give industry and tradespeople time to upskill and to give households the right signals to actually invest in their own energy efficiency. There's so much riding on decarbonisation of domestic properties now, and the need for more funding as part of an ambitious long-term strategy is obvious. But as I said at the very beginning, while we wait for that, and you know, who knows how long we will wait, we should be looking at what we can do right now as housing providers to start making a dent in decarbonisation. And not to put any extra pressure on Jonathan, but again, I believe he's going to be chatting to you after me about what Raven have done with the resources that they have available. So the Decent Homes Standard is under review currently, and energy efficiency plays a major part in that as a result of the Social Housing White Paper as well. So in an earlier survey on reviews into the Decent Home Standards in 2018, a critical, if not one of the main drivers of the review, was the need to embed minimum energy efficiency levels. And of CIH members that were consulted, I think it was something like 90% wanted this included. So the requirement for all social housing to reach EPC Band C by 2035, or in instances of fuel poverty by 2030, that's something that we welcome as a professional body and would like to see achieved. So we believe that the new Decent Home Standard should enable landlords as well to take a strategic approach to asset management and coordination of energy efficiency, along with other improvement programmes across the range of housing types and tenures. But with the Decent Homes Review as it stands, there's no additional funding to implement any new standard. And if it does remain that way, it's even more important that the standard is set to support landlords to look and think strategically and flexibly at how they can incorporate and align the new Decent Home Standards with retrofit programmes to help absorb the additional investment needed. So we would really like to see government work closely with the sector to identify how additional funding could be targeted the most appropriately, especially when we concentrate on the poorest quality of housing as well. Yeah, last slide, please, Steve. So I've kind of given you a relatively brief oversight of current government policy and I suppose lack thereof of any meaningful amount of money. And it's daunting, but we need to sort of normalise this challenge now. It shouldn't just be, oh God, we've got to do this. It's big, it's net zero, it's decarbonisation. It should be part and parcel of everything that we're doing. And I think we need to ensure as housing providers that we're cutting carbon emissions wherever possible with the resources we have to hand. So I would just encourage sort of taking opportunities where you can to improve your own frameworks, even if that means slight adjustments here and there to the building stock when you can, but even to things like energy efficiency habits. So it's worth planning for a big retrofit programme. We know it's big, but work out the implications for materials, the skills, and monitoring the process. Have a look about and build on recent pilot schemes, learn from others and work out the best ways to lever in private finance, as I mentioned, where you can. But again, I think continuous monitoring of everything you do now is crucial to make sure the programme is delivering on what you've said. So set standards and monitor their achievement and be ready to change the programme if it's going off course. We're not going to get it right first time all of the time, but I think we'd like to get to a point where we do, so we're not, you know, wasting money and having to redo things over and over again. But yes, monitor your achievements and be ready to change things. Again, I'm just going to refer to Stratford District Council here, who will be consulting with their residents and staff at every stage of the pilot. And I think that's important. So think about implementing an energy management strategy even, or pulling together your own energy management guidance for staff and tenants. I think as new technologies are installed, it's going to be crucial that staff and residents are educated and worked with. And especially important when it comes to your residents, as they're going to want to feel that the work isn't being just done to them, but being done with them, not just done at their home. So they'll want to work with you to understand the benefits. And this is where we can have the most impact, I think, as well, with stuff like long-term culture change. And the physical well-being of residents, of course, should be considered at all times. That just goes without saying. I think I'll just sort of end on a note that it's no longer enough really to treat corporate social responsibility or environmental, social and governance, or even just sustainability itself as an add-on, or have people working in isolation from the rest of the business. Working together towards environmental goals should be core to any business decisions in every team now. And I think for success, engagement and buy-in is going to be needed from all angles, not only senior leadership, but staff at all levels, and crucially, your supply chain and your customers. So I think truly embedding environmental sustainability with the skills and with the resources that we have. Again, here I'll emphasise that it's going to mean upskilling, it's going to mean educating and building staff resources internally. But just make sure that you're drawing on the expertise through external partnerships, as well as learning from and getting best practice from external partners as well. Something I hope we can have examples from at the end as well from everybody who's on the webinar. But yeah, that's all from me, really, a bit of a fly through. But I hope that was useful. And I'll pass you on to Jonathan now to talk about Raven's decarbonisation journey.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Alex. I'm now going to try and share my screen, so just bear with me a sec. Let's try. Can you see that yet?
Yep. That's it.
Yep, okay. That's it. That's good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. I want to allow some time for questions at the end, so I'm going to really skip through this so that the questions hopefully can pull out the things that you're all interested in. It does sound a bit like Raven's got all the answers. I can assure you Raven has barely scratched the surface of the right questions. Going to talk a little bit about how we got started in case some of you are just at that stage. As Alex said, a bit about data and sizing the challenge that we've got, and then how we kind of shoehorn it into our plans where we've already kind of committed all of our financial capacity and then suddenly have to find space for this, and a bit about the challenge and opportunity that this poses, and to talk a little bit about regeneration and about taking residents with us. We started by kind of working with our board. This is probably about 18 months ago or so, briefing them on the climate change agenda. It was pretty much an open door, so I wouldn't worry too much about how do you get your board to come with you. Most people live in the real world and understand the pressures that we're all facing. We then had to we chose to do an assessment of our environmental impact across the business as a whole. And so we got a company called Bioregional to do that, look at our carbon emissions as well as other environmental impacts across the whole of our operation. And not surprisingly, our homes are the key contributor to carbon emissions. So we moved then to employ another consultancy to help us review the carbon emissions across all of our stock. And that's where the data comes in. About 25% of our data wasn't where we thought it was. It just wasn't there, or it was inaccurate, gobbledygook. So we had to improve the standard of our data to get to what you see here, which is really a profile of our stock. We're a 6,000 home housing association in Surrey and Sussex, and our SAP and carbon emissions are slightly better than the national average. So when we looked at this originally, the national average was around about 68 and our SAP 74, and carbon emissions 2.7 against ours 2.12. So what I talk about now is slightly better than the average. We ran all of our properties through some software, Chrome software, which is a kind of industry standard that has the solutions for delivering against a carbon target and the costs associated with those solutions, and matches it to your property types, and it churns out a figure at the end. One of the key things that you'll need to do is to decide what your target is. Stop counting the definitions of net zero carbon. There are lots, so you can pick whichever one you like, but don't wait for total clarity. Hopefully it will come, and I hope the sector will help shape that with government about what the clarity is around our policy targets, or the government's expectations of the sector. We chose to reduce our carbon emissions by 85% by 2050, with the assumption that the other 15% would come from decarbonisation of the grid. So we can debate that, I'm sure, all day. We're only looking at the moment at operational carbon reduction, or carbon emissions. So the carbon generated by operating the home. We're not looking at the supply chain for embedded carbon. We have that in our environmental strategy, and we will get to that, but we're not stopping our planning and our early work on reducing our operational carbon emissions whilst we try and design a perfect system. So at the moment we're focusing on that. And you'll also want to decide on how you're going to measure it. So SAP's pretty crude. So we're looking at kilowatt hours per square metre per year, and trying to design specifications for new build and for retrofit around that. Right, I'll skip on. This is the profile of our stock. So cost of retrofit along the bottom, number of properties in that category at the side. You can see kind of 22% of our stock, what you might crudely call low cost, 16% high cost, and the majority sitting somewhere in the middle. And the solutions for those different categories are typically this. I mean, Alex showed you a really useful infographic on a much more granular level than this, but low cost, those are usually our newish homes. So we've got about 1,000 new build homes, and typically we're looking at heat sources there. The high cost is the whole house retrofit, the kind of energy sprung solution, and the stuff in the middle is well, I'll talk a bit more about taking residents with us, but there's a fabric first approach there, so that we don't lumber residents with high electricity bills and some fancy heating solution without first insulating their homes. The answer to our elephant in the room is how much it costs. We had in our 30-year business plan £470 million for all of our asset spend. Our calculation, having gone through these stages, is that the net zero, the net cost of delivering our target carbon reduction is £104 million. So that's a 22% increase in what we currently had in our business plan. And so we've arrived at that. We've taken the costs of going from where we are now to our 85% reduction. We've added on VAT and overheads. We've taken out what we already had in our business plan that will now no longer be required. And we've made an assumption about some efficiencies, because it's going to hopefully cost us less as we all get cracking on this than it will cost us today. And we assumed a 10% efficiency, which I think is hugely prudent. It should be way more than that if we get our act together. And a very modest level of grants, again, because we're business planning. But nevertheless, that's a huge increase on what we had. Me going on holiday, this is trying to get it into a business plan. I'll come to this slide in a minute. So £104 million and the business plan that's already fully committed. How do you do that? So we took this to the board. We've got a digital transformation program underway. That's £4.5 million. We've got health and safety. That's £10 million. We're developing about 250 homes a year, and we've committed to deliver those at higher zero carbon standards. So that's an additional cost. We're responding to affordability anyway, but post-COVID even more. And there are demands for higher property standards from our residents. And you will all have these in one way, shape or form already on your priority list. So when we went to the board in October 20, we started trying to work out how we were going to do this, and the moving parts of the flexibility for us, and it might be different for you, is the pace at which we move to net zero carbon, the approach to decommissioning our existing homes for regeneration or disposal, and the scale of our development programme. So those three were the three that we were playing with as we were looking at how we could get this into our business plan. In terms of pace, this is the graph that you see in front of you. This is the 30 years of the business plan, and obviously how much each year we're spending on retrofit. We took the red bars to the board first, and then about a week later we had a second strategy day because they thought the red was spending way too much, way too soon in the absence of clarity from government, both on policy and finance. So they said, no, scale back and push it out, which we did. So we took the amber graph to them, which they didn't like because that wasn't enough. So you have these conversations about pace. And we are settling, as you would imagine, somewhere in between. The next question was about, well, what homes are we going to take with us? Because not all our homes, well, whilst you're just reinstalling a gas boiler, you might not look quite as critically at whether that home is going to be fit for purpose in 30 years' time, whether someone's going to want to live in it. But when you're spending £30,000 or £40,000 retrofitting, you certainly are. And when you're perhaps spending £2,000 on some health and safety improvements, you're going to look more critically at whether this is going to be fit for purpose. So we looked in some detail, I'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a minute, what homes we were going to take with us. And our view, having done this piece of work, was that we would decommission about 750 of our 5,800 homes and regenerate 2 for every one that we sell. So I'm sure we'll talk about the ethics of selling poor stock in a minute. In terms of our development programme, the board was really keen to carry on delivering new homes and delivering them to the higher standard, but recognise that actually a lot of our development capacity will go on regeneration of homes we're now no longer going to keep, rather than additional new build homes. So this is really key, and I think it's something that without substantial government funding for retrofit is something that the entire sector is going to experience. So for us, of our 900 homes over the next 5 years, 500 of them will be additional affordable homes. The rest will be either for sale, because we have a for sale program, or for replacement of what's been decommissioned. So this is roughly half of the additional affordable homes that we would previously have built over a 5-year period. So I hope that makes sense. So although we're building 900, only 500 of them will be additional. And normally we would have been building double that in a 5-year period. So in a zero carbon, pre-health and safety, pre-everything else world. So that's how we've kind of played around with the permutations of what's in our business plan. Just a little bit about that decommissioning piece. These are the assessments, fairly common approach to assessing the social and financial viability of our stock, which we re-ran with our zero carbon and our health and safety costs in it that produce those numbers that I've mentioned. But we are looking on it as an opportunity. We've done regeneration of our stock, as I'm sure many of you have, and it always gives an opportunity to improve the not just the property, but also the surrounding area, and to work with the communities in doing that. And so we see that as a real opportunity, actually, that we will be doing an increasing amount of regeneration over the next, certainly 20 years, when we start to decommission these homes. So this is where we've got to at the moment. We have a business plan that is approved, and we have a business plan that we're working on, because you may well find that you can't afford all of this. And one of the ways in which you could, we think we can afford it, is by getting more flexibility from our funders around financial covenants. So our current business plan has got new build to a higher zero carbon standard. It's assuming no disposals, but we've got 500 homes being regenerated to replace new for old. We've got 25 million of the 104 million that I talked about in that business plan, which we've notionally labelled for EPCC. But unlike Alex, I'm not entirely convinced EPCC is a good target to have, but we've labelled it that. And we've got retrofit of our first pilot schemes, 43 this year, 150 next year, and then more to follow. And our first 70 new build homes at higher zero carbon standards. And the next plan will have everything in it, and that's subject to funders agreeing. There's an issue around how disposals receipts are counted in financial covenants, but they're very sympathetic to that, and I'm sure we won't be the only ones talking to funders. So at the moment we're on site with one pilot. We are going to be on site and completed by December on the second pilot, and one of the messages I would want to get across is getting your data right. Getting a good understanding of your stock allows you to get ready for bidding for funding if and when it is available. So we're ready for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund later in the year. But right now we've got a pilot funded by BEIS's programme on decarbonisation of heat fund, and a second project through the local authorities Green Homes Grant Local Delivery Fund. So if you're thinking about where you're going to get any money from, talk to your local authority is a good route. But there are odds and ends of finance around outside of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and it's just a case of piecing them together at the moment. So that's how we're funding our pilots. A little bit on taking residents with you. I think Alex did a quick reference to some work done by TPAS, and that was TPAS and Place Shapers, and I was involved in that project. And it's taught to residents across a whole range of different landlords about their understanding of zero carbon for them, for their homes and for their communities. And there were some messages starting to come out of that that we're certainly going to be working on and doing more, bringing more forward on as Place Shapers and TPAS. Not surprisingly from residents, money and comfort are important, but so is the planet. So in terms of messaging, it's not just about reduce my bills. People are very aware of and very concerned about the environment, and so that should and I'm sure will be part of the message. Trust in us as landlords is really central. So plea from residents for us to be consistent. So don't go building new build homes to a lower standard and then turn around and knock on their door and say, we're going to come in and retrofit your home to zero carbon, because it doesn't work. And again, in terms of trust, do the basics right. So if you can't fix a tenant's boiler today, don't pretend that you're going to retrofit their home and everything's going to be brilliant. Obvious, but we can ignore that sometimes. Communication. Dedicated staff around individual projects was important, but also, and I think Alex kind of alluded to this, all of our staff are a means of communicating with our residents. So there's a piece around what we call carbon literacy for all staff, and I think there's much more that we can do to educate and inform our staff to then be much more able to communicate effectively with residents as we start rolling these messages out. And then in terms of making it work, residents talked about the importance of this kind of whole house approach. So don't come in and give me expensive or heat pumps that cost a lot of electric to run. Come in and do the whole house at the same time. And then a plea, these are all common sense things, but a plea for easy tech operation. So we can easily stand back and say the reason why retrofits haven't worked in the past is because residents don't use them right. And actually, sometimes they don't use them right because they are really hard to use. So upping our game and the game of our suppliers and designers to make the technology really simple and easy to use is a big part of taking residents with us. I think there's a few kind of reflections here, but let's get into some Q&A, I think. Steve?
Thanks both. That was excellent. That was really a kind of from policy to practice canter through. Right, so if attendees can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, we'll put those to our panel. I don't know if you can see this one. This one might be one for you, Jonathan, from Patrick Keith. It's a bit of a long one, and it's all to do with some of the points that you were making about whether SAP's actually a good measure of all of this. Shall I read it out, or can you see that?
I can. I'm just having a look at it now.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, I'm not. You'll find through these Q&As that as a chief exec, you very quickly get to the limit of my technical knowledge. I'm not an expert in SAP, and I'm not an expert in how the EPC scoring is going to be updated. The consultancies, we work with Turner and Townsend, who are kind of our partners in this, and they are helping us devise, if you like, our own measures for where we think we want to get to. So I mentioned kilowatt hours per square meter as if you like, a performance outcome of whatever we do. And I think from our perspective, that is likely to guide our thinking far more than a EPC rating, quite frankly. And this is where I get a little bit drifting a bit off your question. I'm sorry, but the kind of EPCC target by 2030, I totally understand why it's been arrived at, and certainly focusing on those in the most toughest of circumstances. But actually, it doesn't always help. So, going in and doing work to get to an EPCC might not necessarily be the type of work that you'd want to do in order to get to your zero carbon standard. And you could easily go in, if you don't do it all at once, you could easily be going back in and redoing something you'd done previously. Our approach is pretty much to do it all once when you do it. So we might find that we have some EPCCs hanging over. We'll be focusing on those, working on those first and foremost, but we will be doing it to the much higher standard and getting them up to our kind of performance standard rather than to the EPCC standard. So that probably doesn't do a lot to answer your question, Patrick, but I sympathise with the challenge. I would look at a performance spec that is more granular than SAP or EPC.
And I guess because I am a complete dunce at this, I'm still playing catch up. But I guess part of the problem here is that some of the metrics in all cases can drive the wrong behaviour if you're just simply trying to reach somebody's kind of arbitrary target, which might not be the best target to set. If you're going with the spirit of what this agenda is about, you're probably better off determining your own way of judging this. Would that be right?
Yeah, that is what we are doing.
Yeah,
we're using informed professionals to help us do it, and I have little doubt that it will be different to what eventually comes out My expectations is that the likes of the NHF and the CIH will help shape the targets and the measures at a national scale that the sector will be working to. That's where we should be operating. Until, if you wait for that, you'll have lost, who knows, 3 years.
and of course, over time, government has been known to change its mind about what you should be doing and what you should be measuring as well. So yeah, there's probably no substitute for determining, like you say, understanding the subject and determining your own way forward. I think Patrick's just come back and actually said during your presentation, when you mentioned the kilowatt versus SAP conundrum, that you pretty much answered his question at that point. So right. He's quite happy with that. Right, cracking on. Tim Pinder is, just picking up the point that you made about how do you get all your suitcases in the back of the car. And what he's saying is there's a real mismatch between the sheer scale of funding needed and what's available. It just leaves a massive gap. Consequently, they're unable to factor in those costs to their forward plan.
Yeah, Tim, I totally agree. It's tough. It's tough for any organisation, and I doubt many in the sector be able to afford it. That one of the routes that we've chosen to go down in order to be able to afford it is to look very, very critically at the quality of our existing stock. Okay, so the disposals and the demolition and regeneration part of our solution is a vital part of it, and we haven't started it yet. So this might not look, this is what we think we need to do, and we think it makes sense. But not everybody will have stock like ours of the type where you're just not going to want to invest in it. Some people stock, they will want to keep it all for very good reasons. So that just won't be part of the solution. And without substantial government grant for those organisations, that will be really difficult to do. And they're not necessarily small organisations either, Tim. I think this will be a great leveller in the sector, personally. All the mergers that are going on around, for me, net zero carbon due diligence just trumps pension scheme liabilities. I think it's not just a difficult challenge for small associations, not at all.
And just picking up on that, because this has come up with a lot of our members, particularly those members that have got older stock, where they're just saying, "Oh my God, we've got all this old stock. It's impossible. The amount of money to retrofit that old stock, we may as well bulldoze the lot and rebuild it or something like that." Did you have any debates about, is there a sweet spot between the ethics and politics of disposal and how far you can go on the environmental agenda?
Yeah, there is. I'm sure there is. It'll be different for every board, and there'll be I opened with my board with an aggressive policy on disposals, and I was quickly beaten up and thrown down on the floor and kicked. And they debated that a lot. Very uncomfortable with unloading poor stock into a private rented sector if that's where it goes. But also mindful that of wasting money on stock that nobody's going to want in the future, and needing receipts from A in order to pay for B. So every board will debate that and the ethics of that. You'll have to talk to your local authority partners as well. They are a key stakeholder in that. And if they think you're just unloading poor stock and robbing them of homes to nominate to, they'll want to say in that as well. I think this isn't a silver bullet to solve the problem. It's part of a solution, and it will be a bigger or smaller part depending on each board's perspective. Steve.
Great, thanks for that. And Jill Peckham, picking up the sheltered thing, and I think, again, I'm a bit ignorant here, but this is probably the difference between looking at the greening of individual flats versus schemes. I think, I might be wrong. But what additional work has Raven been able to implement, particularly regarding their sheltered schemes, to move towards zero carbon, given that the individual properties are inside an encompassing building?
Yeah. Hey, Jill. Jill knows our shelter schemes really well. And nice to see you. We're not yet working on a sheltered scheme, so our pilots aren't sheltered schemes, but they are flats. And in those flats, we are currently the first pilot is removing electric night storage and putting in ground source heat pumps, so wet system with ground source heat pumps. So that's and that is the optimal solution for that particular property. So we would be prepared to do that on a sheltered scheme if that was the optimal solution, and that would affect an individual property within a block, but we've not got there yet.
Brilliant.
Just on the back of that, just because I've been thinking about this myself with sheltered schemes, are Raven doing anything in particular to communicate with the tenants in sheltered schemes? Are you doing anything different to work in that way?
We haven't started. The blunt what we're trying to do is to be part of the kind of national conversation on how we communicate best with our residents. So this piece of work, that there are several stages to the communication process, I think, that could usefully be planned out. So if we're doing an individual project, as we are at the moment, then we're engaging with the residents. But the broader communication with residents, I think we want to be a bit more thoughtful about, because there's several stages to it, Alex, and the work that we're doing with Place Shapers and TPAS, I hope will inform that quite quickly, because there's some national messages about what language is good to use and what's good to avoid, and what messages at what time, and so we're holding at the moment intentionally.
Fun.
Brilliant. And from Spencer, the problem is that, you know, our understanding of this is only just materializing. It's like clutching at mist, as it were, or in this case, noble gases, because what you're saying is they're looking at the future, but without knowing what we need is really difficult. For example, hydrogen instead of gas seems to be a good option, as boilers can be reused. Then I read an article that only 11% of the country may have access to this. Government again needs to give us more of a lead on this. Any thoughts?
No, I feel your pain, Spencer. I suppose we are. Everyone talks about no regrets investment, don't they? So don't spend money today you're going to wish you didn't spend in 10 years' time. But there is bound to be some of that. I can't see how we can avoid it. We're trying to use pretty standard stuff. Ground source, air source, heat pumps, and it may well be in 10 years' time or sooner, technology has overtaken us and we regret it. We talked about, I think I was talking to Savills, and they were talking about difference between Betamax and VHS. Which one do you pick? Actually, the younger people amongst us might not even know what that is, but Steve does. And I hope we're streaming, and we, in 10 years' time, the technology, if it's still a choice between Betamax or VHS, I think we're sunk. I think the technology needs to move on really, really quickly. So I would assume that technology will get us to the point quite quickly where we think, oh God, those ground source heat pumps we put in 2021 were a bit, they're already looking a bit archaic. So.
Right, thanks. We've just got a little bit of time left. I'm just looking at Ben's, and again, this is all about kind of purchasing stuff at scale, in this case, quite a small scale. Saying recently procured air source heat pumps after allocation of Green Homes Grant. We found that local capacity to install at reasonable cost was completely inadequate. What's everybody else's experience of procuring low carbon heating systems at low volumes at affordable costs? I don't know if you guys can answer this, but I'd be interested about any observations from our other members that are listening in.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. We're going to set up a commercial company to do it ourselves, Ben. It just seems why this is going to be massive. We're sitting here looking at it as a problem, but it's a huge opportunity. We've got a DLO of kind of 70 staff, quite a lot of electricians in that team. and we're going to grow it, and we're going to do our own, and we're going to sell the service, not just installation, but maintenance as well.
That sounds fantastic. I think there might be a lot of interest in that from smaller associations, particularly if it's done in a spirit of partnership. We're all in this together. I risk using such terminology, but yeah, that would be good to hear. I'd also be interested to hear from our members. You can just email me on the usual email, just what your experience of this is, and to what extent you're actually cracking it. And what we can do is we can share that information on the website afterwards as well. And then just a final one from Anne. I think this is directed to me, saying that many of us in the Housing for Older People group got sheltered schemes. Can we find some examples of low carbon pilots on sheltered schemes? And that's a really good idea. I think we'll pump something out, a bit of a call to action to see what people are up to. Meanwhile, if Jonathan and Alex, as things develop and your own, certainly at Raven, as your own approaches to all of this crystallize, it would be great to hear how you're cracking stuff. It doesn't need to all finish today in terms of your contribution. So we'd be dead keen to hear how you're getting on really with any of that, and we'll circulate it.
Yeah, I'd like to go away and speak to some of our members about that to answer that question. I mean, and as part of sending the recordings and the presentations around, I can definitely try and scope out some work, some case studies and sheltered schemes from our members, if that would be useful.
I think it would be great. I think back in the day, when I was working on this, a lot with the CIH back in the noughties, everybody had a thirst for kind of good practice and seeing how other people did things. And then that seemed to drop off a bit in the teenies or whatever. But I still think there's a massive debate. Why reinvent the wheel when somebody's thought about this, gone through the pain, and they've developed some wisdom. So that would be brilliant. Right. We've overshot, as always, due to poor chairing. Jonathan and Alex, thanks so much for that. We covered so much ground. It was really, really useful. I dare say this will all be, we'll want to revisit this at some point in the next 12 months. It would be great to see you again, see where you're up to with things. So it'd just be really nice to see you again. And thanks so much for your input and the amount of effort that you've put into this. I'd also like to thank everybody for attending today. I think that's us for our webinars this spring. We'll be coming up with another program, probably 5-6 months' time. Do give us your ideas, what you want covered, and we'll hopefully deliver on that for you. So thanks again, everybody, and see you at a future one of these.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.